back in time, mostly with 1 minute over. Sorry, Eric, for your presentation. So we have the loss of seagrass and Matlacha Pass and the distribution and abundance of macroalgae. Eric Milbrandt will be.
Would you like me to stand at the podium, or what sort of?
You are welcome to. Wherever you'd like. You can stay there. We do have the displayed on the laptop so that you can see easily the slides. I'm bringing you a screen.
All right.
So the purpose is to share the results from a recent SCCF project to enhance monitoring and prediction work for HAB events in the Lower Penn Island Sound and Caloosahatchee estuaries. And the CCMP connection is this relates to Water Quality Improvement Action 5 to support harmful algal bloom, including macroalgae, research monitoring and measures to proactively reduce their drivers through the reduction of anthropogenic nutrient pollution and other contributors. Eric?
Well done. Exactly what we're trying to do. We've started noticing a lot more macroalgae, and especially in the very shallow waters of Ding Darling, a particular species of mat-forming algae, right around 2017, 2018. At the same time, aquatic preserves were reporting mat-forming algae in the east wall and other places. So that's you can't really see it, but the seagrass that we have, we're used to, has some macroalgae as part of the community, and it has some epiphytes as part of the community. Yeah, go ahead.
You can see it really well on the computer, but it's not showing like, yeah, ambiance.
It's a nice scallop. And of course, we're concerned that because seagrass provides habitat for all these species, it provides anchoring of the sediments, it clears water. So there's a lot of reasons why we started to get concerned about what was going on. So this is a picture from 2008 of the aerial. This is a CHNEP product. It's a product of many agencies. This map, thank you to CHNEP for showing the historical conditions. We had a lot of acreage in Matlacha Pass in 2018. That's kind of what my focus is going to be on. Is this area here, and the San Carlos Bay, Pine Island Sound is kind of like where this study is happening. The things that we noticed initially about seagrass in San Carlos Bay area is it had really short glacia near the Shell Point area where the Caloosahatchee had a large influence on salinities, as opposed to some of the other sites that we are looking at. And that's a published paper. So seeing sort of slow growth was one response to freshwater and nutrient loading, but that was occurring pre-2017. Whoops.
Oh, it's this computer, so just use the clicker on it.
Okay.
That one's just for show.
Thank you. So this when people were asking me back in 2016, how are the discharges from the Caloosahatchee, which is connected to Lake Okeechobee, impacting seagrass, I would say, well, there's slower growth rates, there's less productivity, so on. And they're like, well, how many acres have we lost? How many acres have we lost? And I would be like, well, the seagrass maps from that time were showing some variation in terms of where seagrass was being lost and where it was gained, but it was very small amounts overall, percentage-wise, until the aerials came back to 2021. And you can see what's going on here. There's huge loss of a seagrass that was happening between 2014 and 2021. The South Florida Water Management District does not fly aerials every other year like the Southwest Florida Water Management District does. So there are significant data gaps, but they are flying them this year. So that's something that we're going to be working with the district to make sure that the flight dates are coordinated on a good, clear day with good water quality. So we saw this loss, and gosh, I did it again. Sorry, I'm so used to pushing the arrows. Other thing that you all are probably familiar with is this trends paper that was published in 2025. And I mentioned this earlier in our discussion about how, chlorophyll, which is in the title, is not showing any trends, whereas for nitrogen, especially, we're exceeding our criteria. And so there's a lot of interesting things going on in terms of the trends in water quality. So right around 2022, this was taken in Matlacha Pass. I've been hearing reports from the aquatic preserve staff and seeing some of their data, but we also started hearing a lot more reports from fishing guides, and they were asking me to explain what was going on. And honestly, talking to all of you all, I'm sort of saying, well, there's a lot of changes that were happening in Matlacha Pass, not necessarily related to the Caloosahatchee, but there was a removal of structure that occurred back in right around 2011, 2012, the Seagrass boat lift. And then more recently, the Chiquita Canal boat lift has been removed this summer. So there were some things that I thought the seagrass loss prompted us to apply for a Region 4 EPA award to document and really confirm what the aerial imagery was showing us, because the losses are quite profound in terms of acreage, and the water seemed very clear when we went out there to sample, but instead of seagrass, it was macroalgae. All right. So the Region 4, which Nicole and Jennifer both submitted a support letter for. I appreciate that from CHNEP, but we're really looking at quantifying the macroalgae throughout the study area, whether it was a small amount that's more typical, what species was it, or whether it was these overgrowth conditions. Where really was it happening? And then to try and look at land-based pollution through grid-type sampling after rain events. So it's really looking at the typical water quality parameters, including like salinity and nitrogen, phosphorus, but also looking at particulate organic matter. And then the third objective was to apply an analysis technique using carbon and nitrogen isotopes to try and see if we could determine the source, whether there's patterns in the source of nutrients, both within the macroalgae community and in the particulate organic matter. And then the fourth objective, which we haven't started yet, was to try and use a removal strategy in patches. So sort of a macro experiment to take a 20 by 20 meter area and modify the conditions by removing mat forming thick algae while having remaining seagrass shoots there. So there's some reason why we haven't done that yet, and I'll try and hopefully some of the data will show you. Today, mostly I'm going to be talking about Objective 1, Objective 3. So species of macroalgae that are common throughout the area. Many of you probably recognize these. Gracilaria tikvahi is probably one of the most common. Gardiella subulata is more of a marine species. It comes in from the Gulf typically, but it is around the passes. And Hypnea, very common species of red branching algae. Did it again. We have lots of Sargassum filipendula. We have not actually seen that very much in the study, but it is common, especially in the late winter months when it's dry. But intermixed, we also have Dictyota, which is a nice looking dichotomous branching algae. And then the greens, and I sort of preface this Caulerpa fastigiata is like our current, or at least in the last 8 or 9 years, has become very, very abundant within the system. And it really is thick, and you'll see that in the data in a moment. So this is what Caulerpa fastigiata looks like when you sample it in a tray. It's often commingled with quite a lot of sediment, so you have to kind of wash it off in order to get a clean sample. It's inconspicuous according to field guides on sandy or muddy bottoms near mangrove islands, forming small mounds, which we have seen around Ding Darling. But then those mounds get bigger and bigger, and in Matlacha Pass there are acres and acres of it. So something is out of balance there. And there's just a picture of how you identify it. You use these tiny little rhizoids. The size and stuff is larger than most of the other filamentous green algae. It has a sort of a thicker thallus. But in the tray, it looks very filamentous, but actually it's got pretty wide branches. And you look for those little rhizoids. That's how you identify it. So we set about sort of ground truthing all the aerial images and strategically choosing sites that had seagrass that had been documented to be lost between the two aerial sampling, some that hadn't been lost, and we sort of separated those in these 4 categories. All seagrass lost, a decrease in seagrass, increase in seagrass, or no change. And we kind of spread our transects to look at that. Started this in 2024. We continued in 2025. So our methods are pretty typical transect method. We use a perpendicular and parallel transect, 2 to 50 meter transects with 5 quadrats randomly selected within each. We collected macroalgae within 10 by 10 centimeter quadrats along the parallel transect and just loaded them up in a bag and brought them back to the lab. So these are some pictures of some of the algae that we found. And this is our first results slide. Get a little bit more into detail. Genus on the left axis and biomass on the right axis. This is everything that we collected in 2024. And you can see that Caulerpa, there's a typo right there, is by far the most dominant biomass species. The second most common is Gracilaria, which, the Gracilaria is a drift algae. It moves around. It can be abundant, but it can also be fairly sparse. So 2025, we had much more diversity, but we still have a dominance in terms of overall biomass of Caulerpa. And just to give you an idea, if you can't see it on the screen because it's probably pretty small, that's 800 grams dry weight. That's a huge amount. So just looking at the spatial distribution of seagrass in the black and white, and then macroalgae percent cover. This is not the biomass data. This is just an estimate of percent cover from our quadrats. it kind of confirms what the aerials were showing, that this area in particular around the Matlacha itself has experienced rather large losses, and it's been replaced by macroalgae, and I can confidently say that's Caulerpa. When we looked at 10-year records of water quality from the CHNEP's water quality monitoring network, you can see that area is also an area with low salinities compared to Pine Island Sound and San Carlos Bay. The black areas are between 13 and 15 parts per thousand, and that's data from 2014 to 2023. So there's definitely some freshwater sources within that. That's not the Caloosahatchee. If you look at inorganic nitrogen, the black values are higher, white values are low. In this case, the same 10-year record, 2014 to 2023. You can see the values are fairly high for inorganic nitrogen, 0.4 to 0.5 milligrams nitrogen per liter. And those are within Matlacha. So those data were collected, I'm sure, by City of Cape Coral, right? All right, so I'm just going to show you some preliminary results of the isotope stuff. I'm not really an isotope person necessarily, so I'm sort of learning about all this. I've done a little bit of tracking, but generally the idea is that you can have different fractions of the isotopic form of nitrogen in delta N15 nitrogen that represents more of an atmospheric, it's very low, and then if it's enriched with human waste, animal waste, it's higher. And that's just sort of this relationship here. These ranges complicate things, of course, because everything ends up falling within 0 to 6, what I found, at least in our area. Let's see what's happening. Oh, to prep the isotopes, it's a fairly involved process. You encapsulate them in tin, and then we sent them to UC Davis for analysis. So this graph is carbon versus nitrogen and the isotopic values for them. And it's separated by genus. So this basically shows that the Caulerpa, which we collected, and this is from 2024, quite a lot of, has a wide range of both nitrogen isotopes and carbon isotopes. And so I think that's encouraging because what I haven't, we're still sort of analyzing the data, but what we can see is that there may be some separation geographically and over time of where these samples and when they were collected and what kinds of, there's probably a seasonal signal as well, what kinds of isotopic nitrogen and carbon ratios there are. So to be tabled for the next talk, I did want to say that one of the things that we've done is we've done a wet season after rain event at the end of this summer, and then we did a dry season after rain event in the spring. Those data do show some potential hotspots for nutrients, and we're going to continue to collect the macroalgae and continue to analyze all the data that we have. But one of the things that we have done with a lot of the 10-year data is make a composite water quality score. Being 11 is high, is bad, and 0 is low. You can kind of see from this slide that we've identified some possible places of point sources and runoff sources that are under. We're going to try and investigate those in our after rain event sampling trips. So the other thing that I've been thinking about more is that a lot of these areas in Matlacha Pass this summer, 2025, was much drier up until August. So when we were looking at macroalgae, we were finding more diverse macroalgae and less caulerpa, which is a good thing. But these areas are now just sandy bottoms with light that's penetrating all the way to the bottom. We had a group come through from University of Wisconsin-Madison working on the Moat Seagrass initiative to restore seagrasses throughout the state. Potentially, there could be an opportunity for a restoration. I personally have never tried to grow seagrass in the lab, but I talked to somebody recently who has, and they haven't had very good luck. So I think this development with Moat to promote restoration throughout the state will hopefully increase our knowledge, but it's something that I would have not suggested previously to try and restore seagrass, but at this point, especially in Matlacha Pass, I think it might be worth it. That being said, we're still sort of trying to figure out why the macroalgae is so abundant and why the seagrass disappeared. So it's just an idea that that we've talked about a lot, and it's been tried a lot, and a lot of times it doesn't work. But so that's kind of the end of my talk, and try and answer any questions if you have any. Thanks.
Hey Eric, this is Chris online. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey man, how's it going? That was great presentation. I appreciate that. You guys are doing awesome work. Should be no surprise to anybody. I had just a couple of questions on, well, a couple of things that stood out to me. I'm glad that you looked at inorganic nitrogen because that's something that we're seeing in other estuaries too, where that percentage of the total nitrogen that's in DIN may be a lot more important than just looking at total nitrogen. But I was curious, did you look at ammonia as well? And was there anything that popped out with respect to looking at ammonia?
So I'll have to say that most of our ammonia values are detection limit. So
Okay.
I'll go back and look, Chris. I don't think there was much of a pattern, but I'm not really remembering exactly.
Okay. Yeah, that's cool because and Brandon might remember this too. As we looked at ammonia at some of the locations along the east wall over the years, and I mean I haven't really looked at it in any great quantitative detail, but it did appear that we saw a pretty steady rise in ammonia concentration, and that could simply be an indication not of point source or non-point source discharge into that area, but it could be an indicator of maybe some flux of ammonia from the sediment pore water driven by the abundance of that caulerpa, because I think you're seeing a similar thing happening along the east wall that you were presenting today.
Yeah, that's a great point. The other thing that I didn't mention, we've had little temp loggers on the bottom measuring temperature, because what the caulerpa seems to be quite sensitive to really warm temperatures. As the summer goes on, we were able to resample some of the sites, and they had less caulerpa than when we went in May. So it could be rain related, salinity related, or temperature related. So we're trying to investigate that a little bit. But I will go back and look at the 10-year ammonium data to see if there's any interesting results there.
Great. Yeah, I was going to ask you about temperature, so you just saved me having to ask you that question.
Brandon.
Two quick questions. I guess real briefly follow on what Chris said. Yeah, we've been looking at ammonia. In fact, we've got a couple of pretty big hot spots on the east wall that we're going to be doing some deep diving in this winter, because there are a couple spots where the ammonia and surface waters are jumping up to as high as 2 to 3 milligrams per liter. And when we did an initial kind of poking around we were looking at some of the residential ponds and whatnot, and we were getting detection limits of ammonia there. But in the groundwater they were using to irrigate, we were getting as high as 0.7 milligrams per liter of ammonia. So we're going to be doing groundwater for this over the next few months because it seems to only be manifesting during the winter in surface water. And we suspect it's because it's when they're using the groundwater to irrigate and they fill their ponds for the irrigation. So, so we're going to be digging into that a lot more. But the two quick questions I had for you. Number one, did it look like the Matlacha bridge is serving as some sort of boundary point in terms of the abundance that you're seeing? So it's more abundant south of the bridge and just kind of falls off north of the bridge. And number two, I know you showed some data in terms of chloroprol abundance in 2025, like in terms of just like weight, mass, or whatever. But anecdotally, did you see a drop off to any extent in any of the areas this year versus last year?
So answer the first question is yes, the Matlacha Pass bridge at Matlacha seems to be an important geographic point. And the second question is yes, it seemed that the chloroprol there was just more other species of algae around. I think there were areas, some of the sites that we go to completely covered with chloroprol still.
So our impression more guys is that generally speaking, I'm guessing thanks to William Milton's for the wiping from the shape components of the bed of the harbor, that we saw generally speaking less of it in areas where it used to be really bad like the East Wall, but we were still seeing flare-ups in places like on Gorda and Finger Canal areas where it's more popular right on the water. So it didn't go away. But at least in areas where we typically have that kind of natural buffer, the mangroves and whatnot, like right on the East Wall or north of Pirate Harbor, where it was horrible last year, not so much from what I understand this year. From what I saw and from what I've heard, but the aquatic researchers would have a lot more thoughts on that because they were out there on the was for sure. So.
Okay.
Eric, I think you mentioned the removal of the Cetus boat lift. And just recently, I think a year or so ago, the Chiquita boat lift was opened up.
Yeah.
If my memory serves me correctly, there was a consent order issued by the state of Florida against the city of Cape Coral. And I can't remember if it was $1 million or $3 million trust fund was set up to do research on the impacts of Cape Coral's development on the estuary. And I think there was a fellow, Dr. Doug Morrison, who I had the pleasure of working with briefly in the lower Caloosahatchee. But it just seems like the smoking guns are there because most of the river water typically flows south toward Estero Bay from what we've seen. But I mean,
yeah, if you look at we did a particle, my colleague at FGCU, Felix Joes, and his grad student did a particle tracking model, and quite a lot of water does go up into Matlacha Pass from the Caloosahatchee. But you're right, there are some changes in hydrology that have happened in the last 15 years. And it's.
Well, I'm just curious as a policy issue, I guess, but why would the consent order suddenly or due to public pressure go away? And I think that deserves some attention, looking into that. But
good point.
there's a reason that those structures were installed, and it was required by the state of Florida.
Right. I'm sure I'm over time, so I'll you guys in the break if you have any other comments or questions.
Yeah, you are right on time. Thank you. That was so interesting. I look forward to seeing the follow-up.
Yeah, sorry, it's so preliminary.
No, that was great. Thank you again, Eric.